She came in on a Tuesday morning, 71 years old, retired school teacher. She walked into her cardiologist's office complaining of mild fatigue and occasional shortness of breath when she climbed the stairs. Nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed emergency. Her name was Margaret, and she told her doctor she had been taking excellent care of herself for years. She exercised. She watched her sodium. She cooked most of her own meals. She had cut out alcohol years ago. And every single morning, without fail, she started her day with what she believed was a healthy ritual. A glass of what millions of seniors across this country consider a wholesome, even virtuous habit. Her cardiologist ordered an ultrasound. The results stopped him cold. Her arteries showed calcified plaque buildup, so advanced it looked like the walls of a pipe left to corrode for decades. She was not a smoker. She was not diabetic. She had no family history of heart disease. But her arteries told a different story than the life she thought she was living. And the one thing her doctor circled back to, the one habit nobody had ever warned her about, was that morning drink sitting on her kitchen counter every single day for the past 11 years. Here is what nobody tells you. The most dangerous thing in your kitchen right now is probably not what you think. It is not the salt shaker. It is not the butter. It is not even the red meat in your refrigerator. There is a drink. One specific drink that hundreds of millions of people consume daily that has been quietly and systematically attacking the arterial walls of people over 60 in ways that modern science is only beginning to fully understand. And the most troubling part is not that it exists. The most troubling part is that the packaging calls it healthy. The marketing calls it natural. And the medical establishment has been so slow to speak clearly about it that people like Margaret are suffering consequences that are entirely preventable. Today, you are going to find out exactly what that drink is. You are going to understand why it targets the aging cardiovascular system with such specific and measurable damage. And you are going to walk away with 5 concrete, science-grounded changes you can begin making starting tonight. Stay with me, because what you are about to hear may be the most important 17 minutes of information you have consumed all year. The doctor sharing what follows has spent the last 3 decades in a cardiothoracic surgery suite, over 2,000 open-heart procedures. Years of seeing what the inside of a diseased artery actually looks like, what it feels like under a surgeon's hands, what it costs a family sitting in a waiting room. I have held beating hearts in my hands. I have seen plaques so thick and so calcified that the vessel felt more like a stone tube than living tissue. And in all of those years, one thing has become impossible to ignore. The damage people walk in with is not random. It follows patterns. It traces back to habits. And the habit nobody in mainstream medicine talks about loudly enough is what is sitting in your refrigerator or on your breakfast table right this moment. The medical establishment is not malicious, but it is slow. It is incentivized toward treatment rather than prevention. And by the time guidelines catch up with the science, millions of people have already spent a decade doing exactly the wrong thing while believing they were doing everything right. That is not acceptable. That is why this conversation matters. Now, before we get to the specific drink, you need to understand one foundational truth. The body you have at 65, 70, or 75 is not operating the same way it was at 40. This is not pessimism. This is physiology. And the difference matters enormously when we talk about what certain substances do to your vascular system. Here is the simplest way to think about it. Imagine a garden hose that has been used every single day for 30 years. The rubber has stiffened. The interior has accumulated mineral deposits. The pressure required to push water through it has increased. The material can no longer expand and contract as smoothly as it once did. That is what happens to arterial tissue as we age. After 60, the inner lining of your arteries, a delicate single-cell thick layer called the endothelium, becomes progressively less elastic, less capable of self-repair, and significantly more vulnerable to inflammatory assault. A study published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology found that endothelial function declines measurably with age independent of other risk factors. The body is less forgiving. The same substance that a 40-year-old metabolizes and clears without consequence can, in a 65-year-old, trigger an inflammatory response that takes days to resolve and leaves microscopic damage in its wake. Add to this one additional truth. After 60, insulin sensitivity decreases. The liver's processing efficiency slows. Inflammatory markers that were once kept in check by a younger, more resilient immune response begin to trend upward chronically. The aging cardiovascular system is not broken, but it is operating with thinner margins. And that means that the question is not just what a substance does to a human body in general. The question is what it does to your body at this stage of life with those thinner margins in play. Now, the drink. Let us talk about it directly because you have waited long enough. The number one drink that is quietly damaging the arteries of seniors across this country every single day is commercially produced fruit juice. Not whole fruit, not homemade, freshly pressed juice consumed occasionally. Commercially produced, shelf-stable, or refrigerated fruit juice. The orange juice, the apple juice, the cranberry cocktail, the pomegranate blend, the grape juice marketed to seniors for its antioxidants. The products that line 4 full feet of every grocery store refrigerator case in America, the ones sold in plastic jugs with words like heart healthy and 100% natural and vitamin C boosted printed across the label. That drink, that daily ritual that generations of Americans were told represented good health. It is, for the aging cardiovascular system specifically, one of the most quietly destructive habits a senior can maintain. Here is what nobody tells you, and here are the 5 specific mechanisms by which it is damaging your arteries right now. The first thing you need to understand is what happens to your blood sugar the moment commercially produced fruit juice touches your digestive system. When you eat a whole orange, the fiber in that orange acts as a brake system. It slows the release of the fruit's natural sugars, fructose and glucose, into your bloodstream. Your pancreas has time to respond proportionally. Your blood sugar rises gradually. The system manages it. Now take that same orange, or the juice of 3 or 4 of them compressed into one 8-ounce glass, strip out every gram of fiber in the commercial pressing and pasteurization process, and what you are left with is essentially a sugar delivery vehicle with very little nutritional distinction from a soft drink. A standard 8-ounce glass of commercially produced orange juice contains approximately 26 grams of sugar and essentially 0 fiber. A 12-ounce can of cola contains about 39 grams. The gap is smaller than you have ever been told. In a younger body with robust insulin sensitivity, this produces a blood sugar spike that the system handles and recovers from relatively quickly. In a body over 60, with declining insulin sensitivity as a baseline, this spike is larger, lasts longer, and has a specific downstream effect on arterial health that researchers have been documenting for 2 decades. Elevated blood glucose promotes a process called glycation. Sugar molecules attached to proteins and fats in the bloodstream, including the proteins that make up the arterial wall itself. These glycated proteins trigger inflammatory responses. They stiffen the vessel. They contribute to the formation and hardening of plaque. Every single morning, with that glass of juice, you are setting off a glycation cascade that your aging arteries are progressively less equipped to recover from. Write that down, because no one at your last annual physical mentioned it. The second mechanism is the fructose load, and this is where things get significantly more serious. Commercially produced fruit juice is extraordinarily high in fructose. Unlike glucose, which every cell in your body can use for energy, fructose is metabolized almost exclusively in the liver. When the liver receives a large fructose load, as it does every morning you drink that glass of juice, it begins converting that fructose into fat through a process called de novo lipogenesis. Some of that fat accumulates in the liver itself, contributing to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is now epidemic among seniors and which directly impairs the liver's ability to regulate cholesterol. But here is the part that connects directly to your arteries. The fat that does not stay in the liver gets packaged into triglycerides and released into the bloodstream. Elevated triglycerides are an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease. They contribute to the formation of small, dense LDL particles, the type most associated with arterial plaque formation. And a daily juice habit produces a daily triglyceride spike that, over months and years, leaves a measurable signature in your arterial walls. A study from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that fructose consumption specifically promotes the kind of visceral fat accumulation that surrounds organs and accelerates cardiovascular risk. And the seniors most affected were those who consumed their fructose in liquid form, precisely because liquid calories bypass the satiety signals that would ordinarily limit how much sugar you consume in a sitting. Stay with me, because we are only halfway through, and what comes next may be the piece nobody has put together for you. There is something critical happening in your gut that connects directly to your arterial health, and it begins with that daily juice habit. Here is what the science has shown in the last decade. The microbiome, the vast community of bacteria living in your digestive tract, plays a direct regulatory role in cardiovascular inflammation. Certain bacterial species produce compounds called short-chain fatty acids that actively reduce inflammation in the arterial wall. Other bacterial species, when they proliferate, produce compounds called lipopolysaccharides that leak through a compromised gut lining and enter the bloodstream, where they are recognized by the immune system as invaders and trigger a systemic inflammatory response. Systemic inflammation, chronic and low-grade, is now understood to be one of the central drivers of atherosclerosis, the hardening and narrowing of arteries. Here is where the juice comes in. Commercially produced fruit juice is high in fructose and essentially devoid of the prebiotic fiber that feeds the beneficial bacteria in your gut. A daily juice habit, consumed over months and years, actively shifts the balance of your microbiome toward the bacterial species that produce those inflammatory compounds. Research published in the journal Cell Host and Microbe demonstrated that high-sugar, low-fiber diets measurably reduce microbial diversity within weeks and promote the specific bacterial imbalances associated with increased intestinal permeability. And here's the number. Adults over 60 already experience age-related microbiome shifts that make them more vulnerable to this imbalance. The juice is not the only cause. But for a gut ecosystem already under age-related pressure, that daily fructose load is like pouring gasoline on a fire that was already beginning to smolder. Now, before we get to items 4 and 5, a brief word about what you may have already been told about fruit juice. You may have heard about antioxidants. You may have read about vitamin C. You may have seen the phrase "heart healthy" on the label of your orange juice container this very morning, possibly with a small red heart printed next to it. Here is the critical distinction that food marketing depends on you not making. The antioxidants present in whole fruit are bound to fiber, and that binding affects how they are absorbed, how they interact with your digestive system, and how effectively they actually function as antioxidants in your body. When you strip the fiber and pasteurize the juice, you degrade a significant portion of those antioxidants. The vitamin C largely survives pasteurization, which is nutritionally useful, but it does not offset. It does not come close to offsetting the inflammatory cascade produced by the fructose and sugar load that comes with it. You cannot antioxidant your way out of daily glycation and daily triglyceride elevation. That question has stayed with me, as I have watched patients confidently report their healthy habits while their blood work told a different story. The fourth mechanism is one that almost never gets discussed in a doctor's office, and it relates to something called uric acid. When fructose is metabolized in the liver, one of the byproducts of that metabolic process is uric acid. Most people associate uric acid with gout, and yes, elevated uric acid causes gout. But what is less commonly known, and what cardiovascular researchers have been studying intensively for the last 15 years, is that elevated uric acid is also an independent risk factor for hypertension and arterial disease. Uric acid inhibits a key enzyme called endothelial nitric oxide synthase. Nitric oxide is the molecule your arterial walls use to stay relaxed, flexible, and open. It is, in a very real sense, the primary chemical signal that tells your blood vessels to dilate. When uric acid suppresses nitric oxide production, blood pressure rises, arterial flexibility decreases, and the mechanical stress on the vessel wall increases with every single heartbeat. A study from the Cleveland Clinic Heart and Vascular Institute found that elevated uric acid was associated with a 50% increased risk of cardiovascular events in adults over 65. 50%. And one of the most consistent dietary drivers of elevated uric acid in seniors is, you already know where this is going, daily consumption of fructose-rich beverages. Your morning juice glass is suppressing the very molecule that keeps your arteries open and flexible. And your doctor almost certainly has never said those words to you in that sequence. The fifth mechanism is the one that closes the loop. Commercially produced fruit juice, consumed daily, drives chronic low-grade inflammation through every pathway we have discussed. Glycation, fructose-driven triglyceride elevation, microbiome disruption, uric acid accumulation, and chronic low-grade inflammation does one specific thing to arterial plaque that makes it particularly dangerous. It makes existing plaque unstable. There is a distinction in cardiology between stable plaque and vulnerable plaque. Stable plaque is calcified, hardened, and while it narrows the artery, it is relatively unlikely to rupture. Vulnerable plaque is soft, lipid-rich, capped by a thin fibrous layer, and it is the plaque that ruptures and causes heart attacks and strokes. Chronic inflammation promotes the formation of vulnerable plaque. It thins the fibrous cap. It increases the lipid core. It makes the plaque more likely to crack under the mechanical stress of elevated blood pressure and the turbulent blood flow of a stiffened artery. This is the picture that the inside of Margaret's arteries told. Not just plaque, but the specific inflammation-driven pattern of vulnerability that represents a heart attack waiting for a trigger. She was not unlucky. She was, for 11 years, doing something every single morning that she had been told was good for her, and no one had connected the dots. It was after a long week of difficult surgeries that the weight of these conversations began to settle differently. You sit in a scrub room at the end of a 12-hour day, and you think about the families in the waiting room. The husband who came in at 6 in the morning and sat in the same chair for 8 hours. The daughter who flew in from 3 states away. The grandchildren in the waiting room watching cartoons on a tablet, too young to understand what is happening behind those double doors. And you think about the breakfast those families ate that morning. The juice on the table. The ritual that nobody questioned. The habit that, if someone had said something, if the cardiologist at the annual physical had spent 3 minutes on it, might have been sitting differently right now. The damage that fills operating rooms is not always the product of dramatic choices. It is often the product of ordinary ones, made daily, over years, by people who genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. Margaret's story did not end in that operating room. She came back 6 months after her procedure and her dietary changes. Her triglycerides had dropped by 61 points. Her fasting glucose had normalized. Her blood pressure, which had required 2 medications, was now managed with 1. Her cardiologist used the phrase, measurable reversal of inflammatory markers. She said something in that follow-up appointment that has stayed with me since. She said, "I just wish someone had told me sooner. Not that I had done anything wrong, just that there was something I could do differently." That was all she needed to hear. And she never got it until it was almost too late. Here is what you are going to do now. These are the 5 things. First, if you are currently drinking commercial fruit juice daily, replace it. Not with a diet drink, not with artificially sweetened anything. Replace it with water infused with a slice of lemon or cucumber, or with unsweetened herbal tea, or if you want the flavor of fruit, eat a piece of whole fruit instead. The fiber changes everything. Second, if you want the benefits associated with specific compounds in fruit, such as the polyphenols in berries or the anthocyanins in pomegranate, get them from whole food sources. Eat a small handful of blueberries or raspberries with breakfast. The fiber is intact. The glycemic response is completely different. Third, ask your doctor to check your triglycerides, your fasting glucose, and your uric acid levels at your next visit. These are standard labs. They are not expensive. They will tell you whether the damage we discussed today has already begun and to what degree. Write that down. 4. If you currently have elevated blood pressure or are on cardiovascular medications, understand that dietary changes of this kind, particularly reducing fructose load, can affect your medication requirements meaningfully. Do not change your medications without your doctor's involvement. But do have this conversation. Bring what you have learned today to that appointment. You have the right to ask questions and to receive clear answers. 5. Share this with someone you love. The person who pours a glass of juice every morning at your breakfast table. The friend who starts the day with what she calls her vitamins. The sibling who has been told his or her heart needs watching. It is never too late to change the trajectory of a cardiovascular system. The research is unambiguous on that. The artery that is still working is an artery that can benefit from less inflammation starting today, starting tonight. The #1 drink damaging your arteries every single day is commercially produced fruit juice. The 5 mechanisms are the blood sugar and glycation cascade, the fructose-driven triglyceride elevation, the gut microbiome disruption and resulting systemic inflammation, the uric acid accumulation and nitric oxide suppression, and the chronic inflammatory environment that destabilizes existing arterial plaque. The fix begins tonight. Whole fruit instead of juice, water and herbal tea, standard lab work at your next appointment, a conversation with your physician that you are now equipped to have. And the knowledge, finally, that the ritual you trusted for years was working against you and that you have the power to stop it. What is one habit you have been told was healthy that you have since discovered deserved a second look? Leave that answer in the comments below. Be specific. Your experience may be exactly what someone else in this community needs to read today. And if this information reached you in a way that felt useful, please send it to one person this week. One family member, one friend, one person sitting at a breakfast table somewhere right now with a glass of juice in their hand. You may not be able to be in their doctor's office, but you can put information in front of them that their doctor has not yet said. That matters more than you know. And if you are not yet part of this community, subscribe now because the conversations here are exactly this kind. Practical, evidence-based, delivered without the institutional delay that cost people years of their health. Your heart has been working for you every single minute of every single day of your entire life. It has never taken a day off. Not once. What you do starting today is your chance to work back. It is never too late. A final note before you go. Everything shared in this video is intended for educational purposes only. The information here is drawn from published research and clinical experience, but it does not replace the individualized guidance of your own physician, particularly if you have existing cardiovascular conditions, are managing diabetes or metabolic disease, or are currently taking medications. Please bring these questions to a doctor who knows your full history. The goal of this conversation is to equip you to have that conversation more confidently and more specifically. The goal is never to replace it. Take care of yourself. Your arteries will thank you.